Okay, Objective 1 for the interactive assignment for Section 4.1. A pediatrician wants to determine the relation that may exist between a child's height and head circumference. She randomly selects 8 children, measures their height and head circumference, and obtains the data shown in the table here. Now in Part A, it's asking us if the pediatrician wants to use height to predict head circumference, determine which variable is the explanatory variable and which is the response variable. Well, first you need to go back in your notes and go back to the definition of what explanatory variable and what is response variable means. So let's take a look at that. The response variable is the variable whose value can be explained by the value of the explanatory variable. In other words, the response variable is the dependent variable, while the explanatory variable is the independent variable. In our example, height is the explanatory variable because the pediatrician wishes to use the height to explain the head circumference. And therefore, since the height is the explanatory variable, then we would say the head circumference is the response variable. Now going back to this question, you can see here that height is listed in the first column and the head circumference is in the second column. So again, the explanatory is the height and the response variable is the head circumference. Okay, now next what we want to do is we now want to make sure that we can draw a scatter diagram in which of the following represents the data. Okay, so in order to do this, let's talk about this. What is the definition of a scatter diagram? Well, a scatter diagram is a graph that shows the relationship between two quantitative variables measured on the same individual. Each individual in the data set is represented by a point in the scatter diagram, and the explanatory variable is plotted on the horizontal axis, and the response variable is plotted on the vertical axis. And then do not connect the points when drawing a scatter diagram. So what we're going to do here is, going back to this question, over in the right hand corner we're going to open this data up in StatCrunch. Okay, and so what do we see here? Well, I'm going to go ahead and kind of just open up and make this a little bit further so we can see kind of what our titles of our columns are. So again, here is our explanatory variable. Here is our response variable. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to graph, and then we're going to select scatter plot. Okay, now the x variable is going to be the explanatory variable, which is the height in inches. And the y variable is going to be the response variable, which is the head circumference. Okay, and so then what we want to do is we want to make sure that points are highlighted. Okay, and then we want to label our x-axis, which is the explanatory variable, which is height in inches. Okay, and then our y variable is going to be the head circumference. And that's also in inches. Okay, and we can make that lowercase just so that we keep that correct. Okay, and then we don't have a title for that. We can just leave it as it is. Okay, or we can just say scatter plot. We can say height versus head circumference. So we can say height versus head circumference as our title. And then we're going to go ahead and select compute. Okay, so now we're going to look at this graph here, and we're going to look at this one and decide which one is it going to be. Well, if you notice here, we got to make sure that the x-axis is the height. So in part A, for the first one, for A and B, we can see that the horizontal axis is the circumference, and that's not what we want. We want to make sure that the height is the horizontal axis and the head circumference is the vertical axis. So we have to look between the difference between B and C. And now we need to look at those points. Okay, so what do those points represent? Well, if we take a look at these points, right, our first point is 27 and then 17.4. So over here, we can look at the data here, and this is between 16.9 to 17.6. And if we look at this scatter plot, we can see that this goes between 25 to 28. So we're going to be picking C as our scatter plot.